Welcome back to Just Liberty, where liberty and justice meet. I'm Alan Reinach, president of the Church State Council, with my co host, Bettina Krause, editor of Liberty Magazine, the oldest and, dare I say, the very best magazine devoted to religious freedom. And if you aren't reading it, you need to read it. And you can go online to libertymagazine.org, just a hint here. But we are engaged in an effort, in an attempt to take back religious liberty from the political extremes.
Hey, Alan, if your day job doesn't work out, come over to be an advertiser for Liberty Magazine. You do a terrific job.
I'm generally not a very good promoter, but thanks. Happy to promote the magazine.
Well, today we're talking about a topic which is not very lighthearted. In fact, it's downright somber: anti-Semitism and its rise around the world. Alan, I'm really sorry that you weren't able to join me for this particular interview.
I am sorry as well. Anti-Semitism is a topic that's very dear to my heart, and aside from what we do on the show, that I have been finding other forums to work on this issue.
So this interview is really looking at anti-Semitism in a global perspective. Often you and I, Alan, talk about it domestically here in the US, but this is a global perspective. And let's get on with the interview. We are absolutely delighted to have with us today Dr. Aykan Erdemir, who is a scholar. He's a human rights advocate. He's also a former member of the Turkish parliament. And he was also one of the founders of a fascinating organization called the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief, which I hope maybe we'll get a chance to talk about in the interview. But he currently serves as Senior Director of Global Research and Diplomatic Affairs for the 111-year-old advocacy organization known as the Anti-Defamation League. So welcome, Dr. Erdemir.
Thank you, Bettina. It's such a pleasure to join you today.
Well, the reason why we really wanted to have you on the Just Liberty podcast is because we came across a lot of news reporting recently on something known as the Global 100 Index. Can you tell us what this is, what this global survey is actually measuring?
Let me tell you this with a personal story because it will make it even more interesting. Back in 2014, when I was serving in the Turkish parliament as a member of the opposition, keenly interested in minority rights and religious freedoms, and I was trying to, draft Turkey's first ever hate crimes bill, I came across Anti-Defamation League's first ever Global 100 survey, which was released that same year. And this was an index on anti-Semitic sentiments and attitudes in back then 102 countries and territories. And what was really striking to me was to see that my own country, Turkey, had higher levels of anti-Semitic sentiments than the neighboring Islamic Republic of Iran. And it was so shocking that I immediately called for a press conference at the parliament, shared the results, and leveraged it first to try to establish an ad hoc committee to combat anti-Semitism, but then also to, go forward with Turkey's first ever hate crimes bill. Now, 10 years later, I'm now on this side of the table, having made the transition from politics to advocacy. And it was truly my distinct honor to have led the 10th year anniversary Global 100. This was the biggest survey on anti-Semitism ever conducted in the world, in 103 countries and territories. And in between, over the last 10 years, there were a number of smaller follow-up studies, but this was the first comprehensive global survey since 2014. And the survey covered 94% of the global population. And it involved over 58,000 interviews in 82 different languages, in some countries with a sample of 500, and in other countries with a sample of 1,000, which roughly gives us, 4.4 plus or minus 4.4 to plus or minus 3.2% margin of error. And it was conducted via telephone, face-to-face, or online. And what I can say is this is really the most detailed, comprehensive survey we now have, not only on anti-Semitic sentiments globally, but also on conspiracy theories and Holocaust denial, as well as anti-Jewish and anti-Israel prejudice around the world.
And I have to say, I went onto the ADL website and started exploring some of the data you have there, and especially something that's called the Atlas, which is an interactive sort of way to deal to dig into the data. It is just impressive. It's stunning the breadth of data that you have collected. But let me ask you this. What did you discover?
So first of all, every time you do a survey, you hope that things are moving in the right direction, right? Indicators of hate are coming down, and the world is becoming kind of a more inclusive, accepting, embracing place. Unfortunately, this is not what we found. Back in 2014, at the global level, we found that 26% of the world's adults, nearly 1 in 4, had elevated levels of anti-Semitic sentiments. And back then, that corresponded to nearly 1.1 billion adults globally with such attitudes, which was really alarming. Now, going forward 10 years, unfortunately, we found that it's now 46% of the world's adult population, which corresponds to over 2.2 billion adults. Now, that represents, in terms of the number of individuals with elevated levels of anti-Semitic sentiments, that corresponds to 108% increase. But in absolute numbers, I think that the the most accurate way to put it is there are now over 1.1 billion additional adults who hold on to elevated levels of anti-Semitic sentiments. And if you're interested in freedom of religion or belief, or if you're interested in, preventing hate crimes and hate speech, that really is a stunning finding. We also have one other bad news, and that is the recognition of the Holocaust's historical accuracy is now less than 1 in 2 globally. It's only at 48%. So this was also a warning call to us because the memory and lessons of the Holocaust clearly have been eroding, and there needs to be more work done there. And finally, the last but not the least finding that we found also stunning is the biggest spike in anti-Semitism actually came from 2 global regions, one Asia and the other one sub-Saharan Africa. And what's really striking about that is these are 2 regions not necessarily home to sizable Jewish communities. So this is something one might call, hating Jews without the Jews, meaning this, of course, raises all sorts of questions about the role of media, social media, disinformation that lead to prejudice and hate against individuals and faith communities that you haven't even met before. So this is also a shocking finding.
You have raised so many issues there that I really hope that we can dig into. One of them is the Holocaust denial or lack of knowledge about what happened during the Second World War. When I was growing up, going to school in Australia, this was a huge component of our history lessons, the lessons of what happened during that time. Why are we seeing a lack of knowledge about the Holocaust? And also, is it geographically, is that is our knowledge slipping at the same rate? Or is it some parts of the world where Holocaust ignorance is more prevalent?
So definitely, I think one global factor is that the generation that experienced the Second World War and its horrors are basically passing away. This also includes Holocaust survivors who can, provide first-hand personal accounts of the horrors of the Holocaust. But as we know, in some countries, the Holocaust is now, a key part of the curriculum. This is especially the case for European countries, North American countries, as well as in the Oceania. And in fact, these are the regions where the recognition of the Holocaust's historical accuracy is relatively high compared to the rest of the world. And by the way, when we talk about the recognition of the Holocaust historical accuracy, it's important to realize that there are three distinct categories. In some regions, for example, we might have up to 20, 30% of the population who have never heard about the Holocaust. And I call this group the low-hanging fruit of advocacy, meaning these are individuals who haven't had an opportunity to learn about the Holocaust because it's not part of the curriculum, it's not part of the public discourse. And there could be a concerted outreach effort in those societies or territories to remedy this. But then comes two other categories. And one is, first of all, outright denial. Of course, that's the most egregious form of Holocaust denial. But then we have seen that over the years, Holocaust distortion has become more prevalent compared to outright Holocaust denial. And Holocaust distortion is, in fact, a more challenging category to tackle because these are individuals who have some knowledge of the Holocaust. So they're not denying it, but then they're trying to distort it by claiming that not that many Jews were actually killed in the Holocaust. So that is a major challenge. And what makes all of this picture even more complicated is a trend that we call the demographic time bomb. And that is, although 48% of the adults worldwide recognize the Holocaust, that ratio comes down to 39% among the under 35 cohort. So that shows that there's a 9 percentage point drop when we are dealing with the people in their 20s and early 30s, and which means if we take a back seat and do nothing, the trends will get worse and worse. So I think this is one important take-home message that one can get from the Global 100 survey, that we need to act now and we need to reach out to the under 35 cohorts.
Now, this idea of Holocaust distortion, I wonder if that is related in any way to another issue that you raised, which was an increase in anti-Semitism in those regions of the world where there are not large Jewish communities. Can we trace the role of social media in both distorting a true understanding of the Holocaust and also perpetuating some of the harmful stereotypes that we've seen, in some parts of the world where there are large Jewish communities? Now this is sort of migrating more easily due to social media. Is that a possibility?
Now, that's a great question, and that's a great hypothesis. And in fact, one immediate, action item we had after the survey was to make sure we have a significant media and social media consumption questions in the next survey. Because unfortunately, in this survey, for all sorts of logistical reasons, we didn't have space for that. But now the findings make it really crucial that in the next iteration of the survey, we ask those questions. But our feeling, right, our educated guess based on our other research and anecdotal evidence is social media, non-traditional media, really play a key role. Sure, there are also media outlets such as Al Jazeera, right, that push a certain distorted view of history and politics. But at the same time, we know that especially the youth, they're more exposed to either the systematic disinformation campaigns on social media or to the misinformation on social media. And what exacerbates the issue is most social media companies have algorithms that amplify hate because it's good for the bottom lines, meaning it's profitable to push disinformation, conspiracy theories, hate targeting groups, because that generates greater traffic. So the key question is uh, how much public pressure there can be to make sure that social media companies, first of all, stay true to their own terms of service. Second, how can they boost their moderation and deplatforming capacities? And third, is there really a role, a greater role, for policymakers to hold social media companies accountable?
And so now we enter into this whole very fraught area of the tension between free speech and and government interference with speech, and that is just, it seems almost an insoluble debate. But I did note recently that Meta had made an announcement that they were actually reducing their content moderation um, policies and approaches, and so called moving toward more free speech, which seems to me to perhaps um, uh, sort of foreshadow even more of this kind of harmful speech on these platforms.
That truly is I know a very important question. I know there's a delicate balance, right, between free speech and let's say incitement,
Sure.
or yes, and but at the same time, we always say the terms of service many of these companies have actually have much higher standards than the legal guidelines. So if these companies are actually true to their own terms of service, actually much of the problem could be solved. And I think that's the conversation that needs to be continued with social media companies. And we should also keep in mind, when we talk about social media companies, I'm sure our audience is thinking about the Silicon Valley, right? US or Europe-based companies. But we should also keep in mind that there are a number of state and non-state actors that are hostile to human rights, freedom of religion or belief, and who have been actively, proactively pushing for hate. Just to give you an example, as ADL, we issued two reports over the last few years. One was about the Islamic Republic of Iran's English language outlet Press TV, and the other one was about the Iranian regime's Spanish language outlet, Hispan TV. So these are, for example, two media outlets that use the freedoms in the West, both in the Americas and in Europe, to propagate hate, to incite, and also to distort and deny the Holocaust. So we should also keep in mind that there are state and non-state actors devoting resources, both material and human resources, to propagate anti-Semitism, to peddle anti-Semitic incitement, and also to distort and deny the Holocaust.
Yeah, and in the US at least, we've always said that the answer to bad speech is more speech. But that sort of equation doesn't seem to be holding true in the situations that you're describing, because the avalanche of bad speech is something that can't be drowned out by the more rational voices in society. Um, there's a lot of bad news in what you've just shared with us. Are there any positives that came out of the report, the survey? Are there any hopeful signs that you saw in the data?
So I think what was the most positive, in fact, surprisingly positive to us, was that even with elevated levels of anti-Semitic sentiments, a majority, an absolute majority of adults in every single region of the world, across the education spectrum and across the demographic spectrum, all agree that hate towards Jews is a serious problem in the world.
Huh.
So the reason I emphasize across the demographic and education and regional segment is now we're able to use this finding to reach out to governments and international organizations and convey to their leadership that, look, there is a majority behind policies to tackle hate if you're willing to take action. Meaning, I understand often voices of hate in the world are louder, right? They're more vocal and more visible than voices of reason and moderation. And oftentimes, as a former lawmaker, I can tell you that many lawmakers are intimidated. They assume that what they see as a vocal, violent and visible minority is actually the majority. But in fact, that's not the case. Our survey shows that there is a moral majority here, and that it really takes courageous leaders to lead the majority, to push for pluralism, inclusion, and acceptance. That's one. And second, I also have a specific case that also shows that anti-Semitism is not our destiny, and in general, hate is not our destiny. Back in 2014, when ADL first fielded the survey, Greece had very high levels of anti-Semitic sentiments. It was 69%. It was one of the highest, in Europe. And, instead of, I know the experience is sometimes countries would rather like to dispute the data rather than change the facts on the ground. So when it comes to Greece, instead of disputing the findings, they have had 10 years of concerted efforts. And it involved, for example, passing a hate crimes law, an anti-racism law, with specific stipulations for anti-Semitism, appointment of a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism, having a national action plan to combat anti-Semitism, the laying the foundation of a Holocaust remembrance site, taking Greece's neo-Nazi party to court and prosecuting its senior leadership for their incitement and involvement in violent crimes, and a number of other such initiatives. And within 10 years, Greece's index score fell from 69 to 50%. So a 19 percentage point drop. And and this happened at a time when the global index score went up from 26% to 48%. So I love giving this example because even if the world is moving in one direction, in the wrong direction, you can actually take action, what we call a whole of society approach,
Mm.
from the government to civil society, to individuals, to faith communities, and reverse the trends. You can go against the grain. There might be strong, headwinds,
Yeah.
but you can still overcome them. And this, to me, is also another, glimmer of hope for the world.
So it must have taken quite a lot of political will for Greece to undertake that effort. That sounds like a very comprehensive approach to the challenge it was presented with. Why was Greece ready to jump in and take the actions which it did? What prepared it to do that?
And what makes it, I think, even more striking is that the time periods I'm mentioning, from 2014 to 2024,
Yeah.
Greece had both a center-left and a center-right government. So, this was quite a non-partisan issue, right? And in fact, that's something I would really like to stress, that anti-Semitism should not be a partisan issue, right? Combating anti-Semitic hate, combating Holocaust denial and distortion, as well as combating all forms of hate, against faith groups, against ethnic groups, should also be a nonpartisan, whole of society approach. And what's also quite, let's say, touching in the case of Greece is that this was a true example of a whole of society approach. Just to give you an example, Albert Bourla, the Pfizer CEO, when he got the Genesis prize, which comes with also a monetary prize, he donated it to the Holocaust remembrance site in Thessaloniki. So here was someone someone who has his family origins in Greece's Jewish community, who has become a world-renowned CEO. Uh, you know, uh, and beyond the financial contribution, leading the way with his moral stance. So I think from one individual's actions to, let's say, a prime minister's actions, when you can connect all the dots, that's when you begin to see results. And I always loved also talking not just in percentages, but in terms of real individuals. So in the case of Greece, for example, back in 2014, there were 6.3 million adults with elevated levels of anti-Semitism. Going forward 10 years, there were only 4.3 million adults with elevated levels of anti-Semitism. So there were 2 million less people with hate. And that, of course, is really significant. And also there's a great trend, which we would love to replicate elsewhere in the world. And that is the under 35 cohort in Greece, their level of anti-Semitism is 21 percentage points lower than 50 plus respondents, which is the reverse of the global trend.
Right.
And also, post-secondary education also leads to a 17 percentage points decline compared to other adults with less than, either elementary or secondary level of education. So the same trend, the same demographic trend also holds true for the Holocaust recognition, which shows that when you take these policies, including Holocaust education in school, what we call the demographic time bomb turns into a demographic window of opportunity, transforming the society into a more tolerant and inclusive place. And also, I would like to stress for our audiences, although I've been talking about anti-Semitism, one can always be sure that hate against Jews never stays with hate against Jews, right? It easily transforms into other forms of hate against other faith communities, against immigrants, against other vulnerable groups, other ethnic groups, other racial groups. So combating hate, we call anti-Semitism, it's the canary in the coal mine, and the world history has, I think, shown that again and again. But combating anti-Semitism will, of course, have also dividends against hate targeting other groups as well.
Many of the things that you've been talking about here have to happen at a high level, at a governmental level. What can individuals who are listening to this program today, how can they participate in the process of trying to turn those trends around?
First of all, when we rolled out the survey on ADL's website, we had a policy call, which allows individuals to opt in and to reach out to their representatives. And our one-stop policy call was to urge policymakers around the world to adopt and or implement the global guidelines for countering anti-Semitism. Now, these guidelines are a set of, it's an international framework that was launched last July in Buenos Aires, Argentina, under the leadership of the U.S. Special Envoy's Office. And it has so far been signed by over 40 countries and multilateral organizations. So, for example, we believe this is a good place to start. It's not a binding international convention. It's a set of global guidelines. It's basically asking for commitment on a number of issues we already discussed. For example, not politicizing anti-Semitism being one of them. And I think this is a great place to start. But also for individuals uh, in their own faith communities, in their own neighborhoods, I think there's also a lot of opportunities. First of all, I urge all members, in the audience listening to us, um, push for building more and stronger interfaith ties, because I think that's the best way to resist hate. If communities get to know one another, if communities get to be allies, if communities stand united against hate, I think there is a lot of opportunity. And I'll give you a concrete example. October 7th, of course, has been horrible, not just for the victims of October 7th, Hamas's brutal attack that, killed over 1,000, devastated communities, but also it undermined some of the ongoing interfaith communication and cooperation. Just to give you an example, when it comes to freedom of religion or belief, for example, one of the key issues, especially in Europe, over the last few decades has been, the right to kosher slaughter or halal slaughter, the right to circumcision, or certain religious accommodations. And in fact, we have seen Jewish and Muslim communities, join forces to, advocate for their common rights, often against both the far right and far left extremists who wanted to undermine freedom of religion or belief. Not just for Jewish and Muslim communities, but also for Christian communities too. So that's why I call